The silence of dawn was broken only by the dull thud of steel meeting earth as Nathaniel Alden dug methodically into the unforgiving ground of Wheatland, Colorado. The year was 1876, and the early October chill cut through his woolen coat as easily as grief cut through his heart. Each shovelful of dirt seemed heavier than the last, not from physical exhaustion, but from the unbearable weight of what he was doing digging a grave for Sarah, his wife of 15 years. Nathaniel didn't hear the approaching footsteps until they were nearly upon him. He paused, leaning against the shovel handle, sweat mingling with tears on his weathered face despite the morning cold. When he looked up, he saw Victoria Rawlins standing at the edge of the freshly turned earth, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, her black morning dress a stark contrast against the golden prairie grasses behind her. "Morning, Mrs. Rawlins," he managed, his voice hoarse from disuse. Victoria had moved to the neighboring farm 2 years prior with her husband, Elliot. Now she stood before him, a widow herself for just 6 months. Her husband's grave was visible from where they stood, beneath the spreading branches of an old cottonwood tree. "Morning, Mr. Alden," she replied softly. Without another word, she stepped forward and extended her hand. "I'll help you." Nathaniel stared at her for a long moment. "Madam, there's no need." "Yes," she said firmly, her green eyes meeting his. "There is." He hesitated, then reluctantly handed her the shovel. Victoria took it and immediately began to dig, her movements surprisingly strong for her slender frame. Nathaniel watched for a moment before retrieving a second shovel from his wagon. They worked in silence as the sun rose higher in the Colorado sky. The rhythmic sound of their shovels cutting into the earth became a solemn cadence, a final labor of love for the woman who had shared Nathaniel's life since they'd both been barely 20 years old. "I'm sorry about Sarah," Victoria said after nearly an hour of wordless digging. "She was kind to me when we first arrived, brought fresh bread and preserves, said neighbors were the only family you got to choose." She paused, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "Made me feel welcome when I was certain I'd never belong in this wild place." Nathaniel nodded, grateful for her words but unable to trust his voice. Sarah had been like that, extending warmth and friendship to everyone she met. It had been her idea to leave Pennsylvania and venture west, insisting that adventure awaited them in the territories. Her enthusiasm had carried them through the difficult early years, through failed crops and harsh winters, and then the fever had taken her in just 3 days. "How's your boy holding up?" Victoria asked as they continued to deepen the grave. "James is." Nathaniel struggled to find the words. "He's trying to be strong, too strong for 12 years old." "Children shouldn't have to be strong that way," Victoria replied quietly, "not out here." As they worked, Nathaniel found himself studying Victoria from the corner of his eye. He knew little about her beyond the basic facts. She and Elliot had come from St. Louis. No children. Elliot had died in a flash flood while trying to save their horses during the spring thaw. She'd somehow managed to keep their small farm running on her own these past 6 months. Despite the whispers in town that a woman alone couldn't possibly manage, by midday, the grave was finished. They stood side by side, looking down at the rectangular hole that would soon hold all that remained of Sarah Alden. Victoria's hands were blistered, but she hadn't complained once. "Thank you," Nathaniel said. The words seemed woefully inadequate. Victoria simply nodded. "The service is at 2. "Yes, Reverend Miller's coming out from town. I'll be there," she said. "And I've made some food. I'll bring it by after." Before he could protest, she added, "It's what neighbors do, Mr. Alden. It's what Sarah would have done." She handed him back the shovel and walked away, her straight-backed posture betraying no hint of the physical exertion she'd just undertaken. Nathaniel watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and something he couldn't quite identify stirring beneath his grief. The funeral service was small but dignified. The settlers of Wheatland were scattered across many miles, but those who could make the journey came to pay their respects. Sarah had been well liked, her warm smile and generous nature earning her friends wherever she went. Nathaniel stood stoically beside the grave, one arm around his son's shoulders. James was trying desperately not to cry, his young face set in a rigid mask that broke Nathaniel's heart. Sarah would have known what to say to the boy. Nathaniel felt at a loss, fumbling through this new territory of being both mother and father to their only child. As Reverend Miller spoke of resurrection and eternal life, Nathaniel's eyes drifted to Victoria, who stood slightly apart from the other mourners. Their gazes met briefly, and in that moment he felt a current of understanding pass between them. She knew this pain, had walked this same bitter path. The realization didn't lessen his grief, but somehow made it more bearable. After the last prayer was said and the final hymn sung, the small gathering dispersed. Several women from town had brought food, which they laid out on the kitchen table with quiet efficiency. Nathaniel accepted condolences mechanically, shaking hands and nodding at words he barely heard. Later, when the last visitor had gone and James had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, Nathaniel sat alone on his porch. The October night was clear, stars pricking the vast darkness above with cold fire. Sarah had loved nights like this, often sitting outside until the chill drove her in. A lantern light appeared in the distance, bobbing gently as it approached along the path that connected the two properties. Soon, Victoria emerged from the darkness, carrying a covered dish. "I thought you might be still awake," she said, climbing the porch steps. "I brought some stew." "For tomorrow." "You've already done too much, Mrs. Rawlins." "Victoria," she corrected him, "and it's nothing more than what others have done for me." She set the dish down on the small table between their chairs. "May I sit for a moment?" Nathaniel nodded, and she settled into the empty chair that had been Sarah's favorite spot. "Does it get easier?" he asked after a long silence, surprising himself with the question. Victoria considered this, her face thoughtful in the dim light from the lantern. "Not easier. Different. The pain changes shape. Some days it's a boulder crushing your chest. Other days it's just there, like a stone in your boot that you've gotten used to walking with." They sat quietly for a while, the night sounds of the prairie a gentle backdrop to their shared solitude. "I should let you rest," Victoria said eventually, rising. "Thank you," Nathaniel said, standing as well. "For the stew, for the help today. We widows and widowers have to look after each other, Mr. Alden." She offered a small, sad smile. "Out here, that's sometimes all we have." As he watched her walk back toward her own farm, Nathaniel felt a fleeting sense of something beyond the overwhelming grief, a recognition, perhaps, of the resilience that bound them together in this harsh, beautiful place. The days following Sarah's funeral blurred together for Nathaniel. He moved through his tasks like a man sleepwalking, feeding the livestock, checking the fences, preparing meals that neither he nor James had much appetite for. Sometimes, he would find himself standing in the middle of a room, unable to remember what he had intended to do there. James had returned to the small schoolhouse in Wheatland after a week, more out of Nathaniel's insistence that routine might help than any desire on the boy's part. In the evenings, they sat in strained silence, neither knowing how to bridge the chasm that grief had opened between them. It was Victoria who broke through the fog first. She appeared one morning as Nathaniel was attempting to mend a tear in James's shirt, his large fingers clumsy with the needle and thread. "I brought some eggs," she said, setting a small basket on the table. Then she eyed his handiwork critically. "Would you like me to do that?" Too tired to feel embarrassed, Nathaniel handed over the shirt and needle. Sarah always handled the mending. Victoria nodded, sitting down at the table. Her capable hands made quick work of the tear. Elliot couldn't sew a button if his life depended on it. Said it wasn't men's work. She glanced up with a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Funny how quickly he changed his mind when we were 3 days from civilization with a ripped pair of trousers." The unexpected humor caught Nathaniel off guard, and he found himself smiling for the first time in weeks. It felt strange, almost like a betrayal. Victoria seemed to read his thoughts. "It's all right to smile, you know. Sarah wouldn't want you walking around like a ghost." Nathaniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what she'd want anymore. I keep thinking I'll turn around and she'll be there, telling me I'm doing everything wrong." "Are you?" Victoria asked, tying off her thread and examining her neat stitches. "Doing everything wrong, probably." He gestured to the house, which had begun to show signs of neglect. Dishes were piled in the sink, Dust gathered in corners and laundry lay in unsorted heaps. Victoria finished with the shirt and folded it carefully. What if I came by a few times a week, just to help get things back in order? I couldn't ask you to do that, Nathaniel protested. You have your own place to manage. You didn't ask, I offered. Her expression was matter of fact, brooking no argument. Besides, my place is half the size of yours, and I don't have a growing boy tracking in mud every day. Before Nathaniel could formulate another objection, Victoria had already risen and begun filling the washbasin with water. And so began a new routine. 3 times a week, Victoria would arrive at the Alden farm in the mid-morning. She tackled the household tasks that had overwhelmed Nathaniel, washing clothes, making bread, mending what needed repair. Sometimes she brought vegetables from her garden or fresh eggs from her chickens. Occasionally, she would stay for the noon meal, sitting at the table with Nathaniel and James when he was home from school. At first, James was wary of her presence, seeing it perhaps as an attempt to replace his mother. He answered Victoria's gentle questions with monosyllables, his eyes downcast. But Victoria was patient, never pushing, giving the boy space to grieve in his own way. One afternoon, in late November, Nathaniel returned from checking his livestock to find Victoria and James sitting at the kitchen table, heads bent over something. As he came closer, he saw they were looking at Sarah's recipe book, the pages spotted with years of cooking stains. And she always added cinnamon, Victoria was asking. Yes, madam, James replied. Even though it wasn't in the recipe, she said it was her secret ingredient. Your mother was a wise woman. I bet that made it special. James nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Pa always said he could tell when someone else made apple pie because it didn't have Ma's secret touch. Nathaniel paused in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt this fragile moment. It was the most he'd heard James say at once since Sarah died. Victoria glanced up, seeing him. James is teaching me some of Sarah's recipes. I thought maybe we could try her apple pie for Sunday dinner. That would be nice, Nathaniel said, his throat suddenly tight. He met Victoria's gaze over his son's head, trying to convey his gratitude with a look. She seemed to understand, offering a small nod before turning back to the recipe book. Now, what about her biscuits? James tells me they were light as clouds. As winter deepened its hold on the Colorado plains, the relationship between the two households shifted subtly. Victoria's visits became a fixed part of their lives, something both Nathaniel and James began to anticipate rather than merely accept. Sometimes Nathaniel would ride over to Victoria's farm to help with tasks that required a man's strength, chopping extra firewood, fixing a leaky roof, or mending her corral fence. They began to share Sunday dinners, alternating between the two houses. These meals became bright spots in the otherwise bleak winter days, occasions for conversation and even laughter. James slowly emerged from his shell, especially after Victoria gave him the responsibility of caring for a motherless lamb she'd found half-frozen one January morning. You have gentle hands, she told him as she showed him how to bottle feed the tiny creature. Some people are just naturally good with animals. The pride that shone in the boy's eyes at her words made Nathaniel's heart ache with both sadness and gratitude. One evening in early February, a blizzard descended without warning, the temperature plummeting as wind howled across the plains. Nathaniel paced anxiously by the window, watching the wall of white obliterate the landscape. Victoria's alone over there, he said, more to himself than to James, who was reading by the fire. James looked up from his book. She'll be all right, Pa. Victoria knows how to take care of herself. Nathaniel was struck by the confidence in his son's voice, and by his casual use of Victoria's first name, something that had happened gradually over the past months. He was right, of course. Victoria was more capable than most men Nathaniel knew. Still, the thought of her facing the storm alone troubled him. The blizzard lasted 3 days, the snow piling into drifts higher than a man's head in places. As soon as the wind died down enough to venture outside, Nathaniel saddled his most sure-footed horse. I'm going to check on Mrs. Rawlins, he told James. You stay here and keep the fire going. The journey that normally took 15 minutes stretched to nearly an hour as Nathaniel's horse picked its way through snowdrifts. When Victoria's farmhouse finally came into view, Nathaniel felt a rush of relief at the sight of smoke rising from the chimney. He had to bang loudly on the door, which was partially blocked by snow. When Victoria finally opened it, her face lit up with such genuine pleasure that something shifted in Nathaniel's chest. "Nathaniel," she exclaimed. It was the first time she'd called him by his first name. "I was beginning to think I'd be snowed in until spring." Her small house was warm and cozy, smelling of pine and freshly baked bread. The lamb, now noticeably larger, bleated a greeting from a makeshift pen near the stove. "I came to make sure you were all right," Nathaniel said, suddenly feeling foolish. Of course she was all right. This woman had managed on her own through worse than a snowstorm. "I'm fine," she assured him, taking his coat to hang by the fire. "But I'm glad for the company all the same. 3 days is a long time to talk only to a lamb, no matter how good a listener he is." She insisted he stay for coffee and fresh bread, and Nathaniel found himself in no hurry to leave. They talked easily, about practical matters, at first how much feed remained for the livestock, whether the root cellars would last until spring, but gradually drifted to more personal topics. Victoria spoke of her childhood in St. Louis, her father's bookshop where she developed a love of reading, her initial reluctance to follow Eliot West. "But he had such dreams," she said, her eyes distant with memory. "He could make you believe anything was possible." "Sarah was like that," Nathaniel offered. "Coming west was her idea. I'd have been content to stay in Pennsylvania all my life, but she wanted more, for us, for James." He paused, realizing it had become easier to speak of Sarah. The pain was still there, but it no longer robbed him of breath. "She would have liked you." Victoria smiled, her eyes warm. "I think I would have liked her too." She reached across the table impulsively and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for checking on me." Nathaniel was acutely aware of the touch, her fingers small but strong against his weather-roughened hand. For a startling moment, he didn't want to let go. The realization confused him, and he withdrew his hand perhaps too quickly. If Victoria noticed his discomfort, she didn't show it. Instead, she rose and began packing a basket with bread and preserves. "Take this for James, and tell him the lamb is eager to see him once the paths are clear." Riding home through the snow, Nathaniel found himself reviewing the visit, particularly that moment of connection when she had touched his hand. It had been so long since he'd experienced any kind of physical contact beyond ruffling his son's hair or the perfunctory handshakes of business in town. The simple human warmth of Victoria's gesture had affected him more deeply than he cared to admit. These thoughts troubled him. It felt disloyal to Sarah's memory to notice another woman's touch, to enjoy another woman's company. Yet even as guilt nagged at him, Nathaniel couldn't deny that Victoria had brought something essential back into his and James's lives, a sense of possibility, of life continuing despite loss. As February gave way to March, the snow began to recede, revealing the first tentative signs of spring. The days grew incrementally longer, and with them came the annual rituals of planting preparation. Nathaniel found himself thinking ahead for the first time since Sarah's death, making plans for crops and improvements to the farm. Victoria still came to help with household tasks, but increasingly, she and Nathaniel worked side by side outdoors as well. She had decided to plant a larger vegetable garden than she could manage alone, and Nathaniel offered to help turn the soil. "You don't have to do this," Victoria said as they worked together one mild afternoon. "I know you have enough to do on your own place." Nathaniel paused, leaning on his spade. "I want to," he said simply. "You've done so much for us." Victoria stopped working as well, pushing a strand of hair from her face. The spring sun had brought a flush to her cheeks that Nathaniel found himself noticing. "It wasn't entirely selfless, you know," she admitted. "After Eliot died, the silence was the hardest part. Your house, even with the grief in it, was better than the emptiness of mine." Her honesty touched him. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you took that shovel from me that day. I don't know how we would have managed without you." Something passed between them then, a current of understanding that went beyond words. Victoria broke the moment with a practical smile. Well, this garden won't dig itself, and if we finish before sundown, I thought we might start on the fence tomorrow. I've noticed some of the posts are rotting. Their easy companionship continued as spring advanced. The lamb, now a gangly adolescent, had become James's devoted project. He spent hours at Victoria's farm, caring for the animal and helping with other chores. Nathaniel sometimes marveled at the change in his son, who had regained much of his youthful enthusiasm under Victoria's gentle encouragement. One evening in late April, Victoria came to dinner with exciting news. The mercantile in town received a shipment of books, she announced as they ate. Real books, not just almanacs and Bibles. Mr. Peterson said there's even a copy of Ivanhoe. James's eyes widened. The one with knights and castles, Victoria nodded. I thought we might all go into town on Saturday, make a day of it. Nathaniel watched his son's face light up at the prospect and felt a surge of affection for the woman who had so thoughtfully included the boy in her plans. It had been months since they'd gone to town, except for necessities. Saturday dawned clear and mild, perfect for the 10-mile journey to Wheatland. They took Nathaniel's wagon, with Victoria sitting beside him on the bench, and James perched behind them, chattering about what kind of book he might choose. Wheatland was a modest settlement, but it had grown noticeably in recent years. The main street boasted a hotel, 2 saloons, the mercantile, a small bank, and various other businesses catering to the region's farmers and ranchers. On Saturdays, it bustled with activity as people from outlying areas came to trade and socialize. Their first stop was Peterson's Mercantile, where, true to Victoria's word, a crate of books had pride of place near the counter. While James explored the selection under Victoria's guidance, Nathaniel purchased supplies they needed: coffee, sugar, ammunition, and a bolt of sturdy cotton that Victoria had requested for new shirts for James, who was outgrowing his clothes at an alarming rate. Mr. Alden, a female voice called as he was completing his transaction. Nathaniel turned to see Lucinda Miller, the Reverend's wife, approaching with a warm smile. It's so good to see you in town, and young James too, Mrs. Miller, Nathaniel greeted her politely. How are you? Very well, thank you. Her eyes drifted to where Victoria and James were examining a book together, their heads bent close in consultation. And I see Mrs. Rawlins is with you. How neighborly. There was something in her tone that made Nathaniel bristle slightly. Yes, Mrs. Rawlins has been a great help to us. I'm sure she has, Mrs. Miller replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. It's natural to seek comfort after such a loss, though some might think 7 months is rather soon. Before Nathaniel could respond to this thinly veiled criticism, James bounded over, clutching a book. Pa, Victoria helped me pick this one. It has adventures and Indians and everything. That sounds perfect, Nathaniel said, deliberately placing a hand on his son's shoulder as he addressed Mrs. Miller. If you'll excuse us, Mrs. Miller, we promised James dinner at the hotel restaurant as a special treat. As they left the mercantile, Nathaniel noticed that Victoria was unusually quiet. Outside, she paused on the boardwalk. Perhaps I should do some shopping on my own while you two have your dinner. Nonsense, Nathaniel said firmly. You're joining us. James, go on ahead and ask for a table for 3. When the boy was out of earshot, Nathaniel turned to Victoria. You heard Mrs. Miller. It wasn't a question, and Victoria didn't pretend to misunderstand. People talk, Nathaniel. A widow and a widower spending time together. It's to be expected. I don't care what they say, he replied, surprised by the force of his own conviction. You've been nothing but good to us, and I won't have small-minded gossip dictate who we can spend time with. Victoria studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she saw seemed to reassure her because she nodded slowly. All right then, let's not keep James waiting. The hotel restaurant was a step above the saloons that served food, with white tablecloths and a menu that offered more than just stew and beans. James was clearly impressed, sitting up straight and carefully unfolding his napkin as he'd been taught. As they enjoyed their meal beefsteak for Nathaniel and James, chicken pie for Victoria, Nathaniel found himself watching her. The sunlight through the window caught golden highlights in her dark hair, and her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled at something James said. She was beautiful, he realized with a jolt. Not in the delicate, fair way that Sarah had been, but with a different kind of beauty, strong, vivid, resilient. The thought no longer brought the stab of guilt it once might have. Somehow, without his being fully aware of it, appreciation for Victoria had become separate from his memories of Sarah. One didn't diminish the other. After their meal, they explored the rest of Wheatland's modest offerings. Victoria purchased thread and buttons from the seamstress, while James convinced Nathaniel to buy peppermint sticks for all three of them. They were heading back to the wagon when they encountered Levy Johnson, one of Nathaniel's nearest neighbors apart from Victoria. Nathaniel. Johnson called heartily. "Good to see you out and about." He tipped his hat to Victoria. "Mrs. Rawlins, you're looking well." "Thank you, Mr. Johnson," Victoria replied with a polite nod. "Say, Nathaniel," Johnson continued, "we're having a barn raising at my place next weekend. The old one finally gave out after that last snow. Could use all the help we can get." "Count me in," Nathaniel said. "James can lend a hand too. Bring the missus as well," Johnson said with a wink toward Victoria. "The women are organizing a proper feast." Nathaniel felt Victoria stiffen beside him, but before he could correct Johnson's assumption, the man had already moved on with a wave. They walked to the wagon in uncomfortable silence. The journey home was subdued compared to their earlier trip. James eventually fell asleep in the back of the wagon, lulled by the steady rocking motion and the excitement of the day. "I'm sorry about Johnson," Nathaniel finally said, keeping his voice low. "He shouldn't have presumed." Victoria gazed out at the rolling landscape. "It's not just him, Mrs. Miller, the looks from others in town. People have made up their minds about what's happening between us." "And what do you think is happening between us?" Nathaniel asked, surprising himself with his directness. Victoria turned to look at him then, her expression serious. "I think we're two people who found each other at the lowest points in our lives. We've helped each other survive." She paused. "But I won't be the subject of gossip, Nathaniel. I know what that can do to a reputation out here." "Is that all we're doing, surviving?" The question hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Victoria's eyes held his for a long moment before she looked away. "I should be getting back to my own place more. James is doing better now. He doesn't need me hovering." "We both need you," Nathaniel said quietly. "More than just for help with chores or cooking." Victoria didn't respond immediately, but her hand moved across the seat between them, coming to rest lightly against his. They rode the rest of the way home in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, one filled with questions and possibilities neither was quite ready to voice. The Johnson barn raising brought most of the surrounding community together the following weekend. Men and older boys worked on the barn's frame, while women prepared food and younger children played nearby. Victoria came with Nathaniel and James, bringing several pies that earned appreciative comments. Throughout the day, Nathaniel was conscious of the glances and whispers that followed them. Victoria kept herself busy with the other women, maintaining a careful distance that he felt keenly after months of easy companionship. During a break in the work, Reverend Miller approached Nathaniel as he was getting water from the well. "Fine day for a raising," the Reverend commented, wiping sweat from his brow. "That it is," Nathaniel agreed, handing the man a dipper of cool water. Miller drank deeply, then fixed Nathaniel with a penetrating look. "My wife mentioned seeing you in town last weekend, with Mrs. Rawlins." Nathaniel stiffened. "She's been a good neighbor to us since Sarah passed." No doubt," Miller nodded. "A virtuous woman is to be praised, but appearances matter, Nathaniel, especially where children are concerned." "James adores her," Nathaniel replied, an edge creeping into his voice. "She's helped him through the worst time in his young life." Miller sighed. "I'm not questioning her character, but a widow and widower spending so much time together. People talk, and James is at an impressionable age. With all due respect, Reverend, my son's welfare is my concern. And I don't see how having a kind, decent woman in his life could possibly harm him." "If your intentions are honorable," Miller began. "My intentions are my own business," Nathaniel cut him off, then immediately regretted his sharpness. More moderately, he added, "I appreciate your concern, but James and I are managing just fine." The Reverend studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Just consider what I've said, for all your sakes. He handed back the empty dipper and returned to the barn raising. Later, as the sun began to set, and the frame of the new barn stood nearly complete, the community gathered for the feast the women had prepared. Nathaniel found Victoria sitting slightly apart from the main group, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "May I join you?" he asked. Victoria nodded, making space for him on the bench. "The barn looks good. Johnson should have it finished in no time with all this help." "That's the way of things out here. We all pitch in when needed." Nathaniel paused, choosing his words carefully. "I had a conversation with Reverend Miller today, about us." Victoria tensed. "What did he say?" "He's concerned about appearances, about James." "I see." Her voice was measured. "And what did you tell him?" "That my son's welfare is my concern. And that having you in his life has been nothing but good for him." Nathaniel turned to face her directly. "Victoria, I don't care what people think, but I do care what you think, what you want." She was silent for a long moment, her eyes still on the fading colors of the sunset. "What I want," she finally said softly, "is not to be the cause of whispers behind your back, or James's. I know what it's like to be the subject of gossip. When Elliot and I first came here, people talked because we had no children, as if that was anyone's business but ours." "People will always talk," Nathaniel said. "It's what they do when they have nothing better to occupy their minds." Victoria smiled faintly at that. "True enough." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking, maybe I should consider selling my place. Moving into town, or perhaps even back east to St. Louis. My father's still there." The suggestion hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. The thought of Victoria leaving, of the emptiness she would leave behind, was suddenly unbearable. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "Except not to complicate your life or James's." Nathaniel reached for her hand, not caring who might see. "You haven't complicated our lives, Victoria. You've made them whole again." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Nathaniel knew with absolute certainty that his feelings for her went far beyond gratitude or friendship. The realization should have frightened him, but instead it brought a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place. Before either could speak further, James appeared, his face flushed with excitement. "Pa, Victoria, Mr. Johnson's showing off his new stallion. Can we go see?" The moment between them broke, but something had shifted, some truth acknowledged that couldn't be undone. As they followed James to where a crowd was admiring Johnson's prized horse, Nathaniel's hand brushed against Victoria's, a brief touch that promised more words to come. Spring turned to summer, bringing with it long days of farm work and the nervous anticipation of whether crops would flourish or fail. Nathaniel threw himself into physical labor, finding that it helped clear his mind when thoughts of Victoria threatened to overwhelm him. They had maintained their friendship since the barn raising, but with a new awareness between them, a careful distance that felt at once necessary and painful. Victoria still came to help with household tasks, but less frequently than before. James often went to her farm instead, especially as the lamb, now almost fully grown, needed less attention, but still recognized the boy as its primary caretaker. One sweltering July afternoon, Nathaniel was repairing a section of fence when he saw James running across the field from the direction of Victoria's farm. The boy's speed and urgency immediately set Nathaniel's heart racing. "Pa," James called as he approached. "Come quick, Victoria's hurt." Nathaniel dropped his tools. "What happened?" "She was up on a ladder, fixing that loose shingle like you said needed doing," James explained breathlessly. "The ladder slipped. She fell. She can't get up." Without another word, Nathaniel ran toward Victoria's farm, James struggling to keep up behind him. He found her in the yard, lying beside the fallen ladder, her face pale with pain. "Victoria," he knelt beside her, gently taking her hand. "Where are you hurt?" "My ankle," she grimaced. "And maybe my wrist. I tried to catch myself." Carefully, Nathaniel examined her injuries. The ankle was already swelling noticeably, and her right wrist was bruised, though she could move her fingers with effort. "James," he said, turning to his son who hovered anxiously nearby, "run back home and hitch up the wagon. We need to get Victoria to Dr. Bennett." As James sprinted off, Nathaniel turned his attention back to Victoria. "Why were you up on that ladder alone?" "I told you I'd fix that shingle this weekend. It started leaking last night during the storm," she explained, wincing as she tried to shift position. "I thought I could manage it." "Stubborn woman," Nathaniel muttered, though there was more admiration than censure in his tone. "Can you move at all? I could carry you to the house while we wait for James." Victoria nodded, and Nathaniel carefully gathered her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fitting against his chest as if she belonged there. He tried not to think about how right it felt to hold her, focusing instead on getting her safely inside. In the house, he settled her on the small sofa, propping her injured ankle on a cushion. "I'll get some cold water for that ankle." He moved around her kitchen with the familiarity born of many shared meals, finding a clean cloth and a basin that he filled with water from the pump. Returning to Victoria's side, he gently placed the wet cloth on her swollen ankle. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what I would have done if James hadn't been here." "That's what neighbors are for, isn't it?" Nathaniel replied with a small smile, echoing her words from months ago. Victoria held his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "Yes," she said finally. "That's what neighbors are for." The moment was interrupted by the sound of the wagon arriving. Nathaniel helped Victoria outside and lifted her carefully onto the seat. The journey to town was slow and uncomfortable, each jolt of the wagon causing Victoria to wince despite her attempts to hide her pain. Dr. Bennett confirmed what Nathaniel had suspected: a sprained ankle and wrist, painful but not serious. "Bed rest for at least a week," the doctor instructed Victoria firmly. "No weight on that ankle, the wrist needs time to heal as well." "A week," Victoria protested. "Doctor, I have animals to feed, a garden to tend, I'll take care of it," Nathaniel interrupted. "All of it." Victoria opened her mouth as if to object, then closed it, seeming to recognize the futility of argument. "She can't stay alone," Dr. Bennett added, looking to Nathaniel. "She'll need help with basic tasks for a few days at least." Before Nathaniel could respond, James spoke up from where he'd been quietly watching. "She can stay with us, can't she, Pa? I can give her my room and sleep in the loft." Nathaniel looked at his son, touched by the offer. "That's thoughtful of you, James." He turned to Victoria. "What do you say?" "It makes the most sense." Victoria hesitated, clearly torn between practicality and propriety. "People will talk," she said quietly. "People already talk," Nathaniel replied with a shrug. "And you need help, unless you'd prefer to ask someone else." Victoria sighed, a mix of resignation and relief. "No, thank you, just until I can manage on my own again." And so Victoria came to stay at the Alden farm, installed in James's room while the boy eagerly moved his belongings to the loft. Nathaniel arranged for one of the women from town to come check on Victoria's animals twice daily, paying her from his own pocket, despite Victoria's protests. The first few days established a new routine. Nathaniel brought Victoria breakfast before heading out to tend to both farms. James helped when he wasn't in school, proud to be given important responsibilities. In the evenings, they ate together, and Nathaniel often read aloud from one of the books they'd purchased in town, his deep voice filling the room as Victoria sat with her needlework, and James whittled small animals from bits of pine. It was domestic in a way Nathaniel hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, and he found himself treasuring these quiet moments, even as he reminded himself they were temporary. On the fourth night of Victoria's stay, after James had gone up to the loft, Nathaniel found himself alone with her in the main room. She was looking better, some color returned to her cheeks, though her movements were still careful. "How's the ankle feeling?" he asked, stoking the fire against the evening chill. "Better," she replied. "I managed to walk to the kitchen and back today without too much discomfort." Nathaniel nodded, unsurprised. Victoria wasn't one to remain invalid for long. "That's good, though you shouldn't push yourself too quickly." Victoria smiled faintly. "Says the man who was back to plowing fields 3 days after breaking 2 ribs in that fall last winter." "That was different," Nathaniel protested with a chuckle. "The spring planting wouldn't wait, and my animals and garden will." Victoria countered, though her tone was light. I appreciate all you've done, Nathaniel, truly, but I can't impose on you and James much longer. Nathaniel sat down in the chair opposite her, suddenly serious. It's not an imposition, having you here, it's felt right, Victoria. The firelight played across her features, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the questioning in her eyes. What are you saying, Nathaniel? He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. I'm saying that I don't want to go back to how things were before. Separate houses, careful distance between us. I'm saying that He paused, the words catching in his throat. I've developed feelings for you, strong feelings. Victoria's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look away. Nathaniel, you don't have to say anything, he hurried on. I know it might be too soon, for both of us. And there's James to consider, but I wanted you to know, before you go back to your place and we pretend nothing has changed. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her gaze dropping to her hands folded in her lap. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I never expected this, she said softly. After Elliot died, I thought that part of my life was over. I was prepared to live alone, to build a life for myself that didn't include feelings, and then there you were, digging that grave. Nathaniel felt a tightness in his chest at the memory. Hardest day of my life, mine too, Victoria admitted. Not because of the physical labor, but because I saw in you what I had just gone through. That raw, open wound that you think will never heal, she paused. And now? Now I can remember Sarah without feeling like I'm drowning, Nathaniel said. I can think of the good years we had, the life we built, the son we raised, but I also find myself looking forward, not just back. And when I look forward, Victoria, I see you. A single tear slipped down Victoria's cheek. I see you too, Nathaniel. When I think about tomorrow and next month and next year, you're there, you and James both. Nathaniel moved from his chair to kneel beside her, taking her hands in his. Then stay, not just until your ankle heals. Stay permanently, Victoria's eyes widened. Are you asking? Yes, Nathaniel said firmly. I'm asking you to marry me, Victoria Rawlins, to make a life with James and me, to combine our two broken families into something whole again. Victoria's free hand came up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. What about James? Have you spoken to him about this? Nathaniel smiled. James adores you, but you're right, we should talk to him together. If you're saying yes, that is. For answer, Victoria leaned forward and pressed her lips softly to his. It was a gentle kiss, hesitant at first, then deepening as Nathaniel responded, his hand coming up to cradle the back of her head. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Victoria smiled. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you, Nathaniel Alden. The next morning, they sat James down at the breakfast table and told him of their plans. The boy looked from one to the other, his young face serious. Does this mean Victoria will live here all the time? He asked finally. Yes, Nathaniel answered. If that's all right with you, James considered this. Will you be my mother now? He asked Victoria directly. Victoria reached across the table to take his hand. I would never try to replace your mother, James. No one could do that. But I would be honored to be a mother to you, to love you and care for you as if you were my own son. James nodded slowly. I think Ma would like that. She always said families should be together, not alone. She was a wise woman, your mother, Victoria said softly. So it's settled then, Nathaniel said, his voice thick with emotion. We'll be a family. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Wheatland and the surrounding farms. Reactions were mixed. Some expressed genuine happiness for the couple, while others clucked their tongues at what they considered an unseemly haste, barely 9 months after Sarah's death. Reverend Miller, somewhat to Nathaniel's surprise, was among the more supportive voices. Life is too short and too hard out here to deny comfort and companionship when it's offered, he told Nathaniel after Sunday service. And James needs a mother's influence. They planned a simple ceremony for mid-August, when the worst heat of summer would have passed, but before the demanding harvest season began. Victoria sold her small farm to a young couple newly arrived from Kansas, using part of the proceeds to expand Nathaniel's house, adding a proper bedroom for James, and improving the kitchen that had remained largely unchanged since Sarah's time. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with just enough breeze to stir the tall grasses surrounding the Alden farm. They had decided to marry at home rather than in town, with only close neighbors and friends in attendance. Victoria wore a dress of deep blue silk that she had ordered from Denver, while Nathaniel and James dressed in new suits that made them both look slightly uncomfortable but undeniably handsome. Under an arch of summer wildflowers that James had helped construct, Reverend Miller spoke the familiar words binding them together. When Nathaniel kissed his bride, the small gathering broke into spontaneous applause, led enthusiastically by James. The celebration that followed was modest by Eastern standards, but lavish for Wheatland tables laden with food prepared by neighboring women, music provided by Johnson's son on the fiddle, and enough home-brewed beer and apple cider to keep spirits high well into the evening. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Victoria found herself momentarily alone, watching the gathering from the porch steps. Nathaniel was deep in conversation with several men about crop prospects, while James was showing other children how to play a game involving sticks and a small rubber ball. "You look happy," a voice said beside her. Victoria turned to find Mary Peterson, the mercantile owner's wife, smiling warmly. "I am," Victoria admitted. "More than I thought possible a year ago," Mary nodded. "It suits you, happiness does. Not everyone approved at first, you know, thought it was too soon after Sarah." Victoria tensed slightly. "And now. Mary glanced to where Nathaniel stood, his head thrown back in laughter at something Johnson had said. "Now anyone with eyes can see it's right, the way he looks at you. And the boy, too, you've brought life back to them." "They've given me the same gift," Victoria said softly. "A reason to look forward rather than back." Mary patted her hand. "That's how it should be. We all carry our past with us out here, losses, regrets, mistakes, but we keep moving forward. It's the only way to survive." As the evening deepened, guests gradually departed until only the new family remained. James, exhausted from excitement and play, had fallen asleep on a bench near the house. Nathaniel lifted him gently, carrying him inside to his bed. When he returned to the porch, Victoria was still there, gazing up at the star-filled sky. She turned as he approached, her face softened by moonlight and happiness. "Mrs. Alden," he said, taking her hands in his. "Mr. Alden," she replied with a smile, "are you happy?" He asked, suddenly needing to hear the words. Victoria stepped closer, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Completely," she whispered against his chest. Nathaniel held her tight, marveling at how this woman had come into his life on the darkest of days, offering help with a simple shovel, and ended up saving not just his farm but his heart. "I love you," he said, the words coming easily now. "I think I have since that first day, though I wasn't ready to know it then." Victoria looked up at him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "I think perhaps I did too," she admitted. "There was something in the way you stood there, so determined to do that terrible task yourself, to bear it alone. It made me want to help carry that burden. I never imagined where it would lead." "To here," Nathaniel said simply. "To us." Their life together settled into new rhythms as summer gave way to fall. The expanded Alden farm prospered under their joint management, Victoria's practical knowledge complementing Nathaniel's experience. James thrived with two parents again, excelling in school and taking on increasing responsibility around the farm. When winter came, bringing with it long evenings by the fire, Victoria would often look around at their warm, comfortable home and marvel at how far they had come from that grim October morning, when she had first taken the shovel from Nathaniel's hands. They never forgot their first spouses. Sarah and Elliot were spoken of freely, their memories honored rather than hidden away. But alongside those memories, they built new ones. James's 14th birthday celebration, their first Christmas as a family, the planting of an orchard that would take years to bear fruit but represented their faith in a shared future. And when, the following spring, Victoria discovered she was with child, the joy that filled their home seemed to complete the circle that had begun in grief. James was ecstatic at the prospect of a sibling, immediately beginning plans for a cradle he would build himself under Nathaniel's guidance. "Are you happy about this?" Victoria asked Nathaniel one evening as they sat together on the porch, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. It wasn't something we discussed. Nathaniel covered her hand with his own. I couldn't be happier, he said with complete sincerity. Another child to love, another piece of our family puzzle. Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder. When I took that shovel from you, I was just trying to ease your burden for a moment. I never imagined all that would follow. The best things in life are rarely what we imagine, Nathaniel replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. They're what we build together day by day, through good times and bad. As the seasons turned, their family grew. In November of 1877, Victoria gave birth to a healthy son they named Thomas Elliot Alden. James, now 15, took his role as older brother seriously, proudly showing the baby off to visitors and helping with his care whenever permitted. Life on the Colorado plains remained challenging drought years, harsh winters, and the constant work required to maintain a successful farm, but the Aldens faced these challenges together. Their home became known throughout the region as a place of warmth and welcome, where neighbors gathered to celebrate harvests, mourn losses, and mark the milestones that punctuated frontier life. 3 years after Thomas's birth, a daughter joined the family, Rebecca Sarah Alden, a lively child with her mother's dark hair and her father's steady gaze. James, by then preparing to attend the agricultural college in Fort Collins, doted on his little sister, bringing her small treasures from his increasingly frequent trips to Denver and other larger towns. One crisp fall afternoon in 1884, as leaves turned golden across the plains, Nathaniel and Victoria stood together at the edge of their property. Behind them, their farmhouse had grown to accommodate their expanding family, with a new wing added the previous year and a proper barn replacing the original structure. In the distance, the town of Wheatland had grown as well, the railroad having finally reached it 2 years prior. 8 years, Victoria mused, leaning against her husband's solid presence. Sometimes it seems like yesterday that I saw you digging in the cold ground. Nathaniel's arm tightened around her shoulders. And sometimes it feels like you've always been here, like there was never a time when you weren't part of my life. From the house came the sound of children's laughter, Thomas chasing Rebecca around the yard, while James, home from college for the harvest, supervised their play. The scene before them was so far from where they had begun, from the grief that had initially connected them, that it sometimes felt like a dream. Do you ever wonder, Victoria asked softly, what Sarah would think of all this, of us? Nathaniel considered the question, as he had many times over the years. I think she would be glad, he said finally. She always worried what would happen to James and me if anything happened to her. She made me promise once that I wouldn't let grief consume me, that I would find a way to be happy again. That sounds like the woman you described, Victoria smiled. Elliot never spoke of such things. He was always so certain of the future, so convinced nothing could touch us. And yet here we are, Nathaniel said, turning to face her fully. Brought together by losses we never expected, building something neither of us imagined possible. Victoria reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against the lines that years of sun and wind had etched around his eyes. I wouldn't change it, she said. Not any of it. Every step, every heartache led us here. To this life, Nathaniel agreed, covering her hand with his own, our life. As the sun began to set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold, they turned together toward their home, toward the family waiting for them. The path that had begun with a grave and a shovel had led to something neither could have foreseen on that bleak October morning, not just survival, but a life rich with love, purpose, and the quiet joy of days shared. Hand in hand, they walked toward the warm light spilling from their windows. Toward the future they continued to build together, day by day, season by season, year by year. It wasn't the life either had planned, but it was the one they had found together, forged in grief but flourishing in love, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and its endless capacity for renewal.